Excellencies, Madam Administrator, Your Honors, Mr. Senator, Ambassadors, esteemed guests, good morning and welcome. My name is Lise Grande, and I'm the head of the United States Institute of Peace, which was established by the U.S. Congress in 1984 as a national, nonpartisan public institution dedicated to helping prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict abroad. We're delighted this morning to open our doors for the Civil Society Forum of the Africa Leaders Summit, and honored to support the U.S. Agency for International Development as they host this important forum. It is a particular privilege to welcome the chair of the Civil Society Forum, USAID Ambassador, the Honorable Samantha Power. Madam Administrator, thank you and your team for bringing all of us together for this very special forum for civil society voices from across the African continent can discuss and debate and reflect on our shared goal of strengthening the partnership between the United States and Africa, advancing the African Union's Agenda 2063, and promoting inclusive, accountable governance. For everyone who is with us in person for this forum and for everyone who is joining us virtually, thank you for coming and for all of the contributions that you will be making today. It is now my great honor to introduce and welcome to the stage Senator Chris Coons, one of our country's most skilled foreign policy leaders and a committed champion of America's partnership with Africa. Senator Coons is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, where he works closely with elected representatives from across the political aisle to prioritize America's diplomatic and development programs around the world. Senator Coons also serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, and the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, and is the sponsor of some of the U.S.'s most impactful and important legislation supporting development in Africa. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the United States Institute of Peace for sponsoring. Good morning, everybody. Oh, we can be more energetic than that first thing this morning, can't we? To welcome this incredible panel. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you, and thank you for being a part of this conversation today. Civil society organizations are at the very heart of what it means to be free and open societies, to be part of the generational push towards change and towards being more just and inclusive societies. Nearly 40 years ago, I spent time as a volunteer with Maendeleo ya Wanawake in Kenya and with the South African Council of Churches, both of which were life-changing experiences for me. This past August, as a United States Senator, I led a bipartisan, bicameral delegation to yet again visit a series of countries. We went to Cabo Verde, to Mozambique, to Kenya, to Rwanda, and Tunisia, in order to have conversations with civil society leaders, with pro-democracy advocates, with journalists, with heads of state, with leaders of government. It is an important role that we hope we are playing, both here in welcoming you and hearing from you concerns, questions, and criticisms, and in our traveling as well regularly, as many members of Congress and the administration do. Civil society embodies the power and the voice of our peoples, plays a critical role in pushing for reform, holding governments accountable, and rooting out corruption. Democracy endures because of courageous and principled individuals like those on the panel today who are willing to stand up and fight for it. These are people who have faced significant challenges, harassment, intimidation, threats to their lives. The United States must do more to defend those who speak out and to advocate for civil society groups around the world. So I am hopeful that this forum today will play a key role in strengthening old and building new partnerships, empowering civil society organizations and activists who serve on the very front lines of democracy. I hope it will build upon innovative partnerships, like the partnership between Delaware State University and my own state. There is a new USAID Del State MOU to advance partnerships such as agriculture, nutrition, resilience, climate adaptation, a whole variety of policy innovations. As the founder and co-chair of the Senate Human Rights Caucus, as the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the State Department, USAID, all of our foreign assistance programs, I am committed to continuing to fund our programs that support democratic empowerment, that protect civil society activists and journalists, and support the U.S. partnership with the African Union to advance the AU's Agenda 2063. I think our continued work together with civil society organizations across the continent improve democracy, governance, economic growth, the fight against corruption, protect human rights, improve citizen security, and combat gender-based violence. It's now my honor to introduce a dear friend, United States USAID Administrator Samantha Power, who does not want me to read the entire 10-minute and lavish introduction I have, which is a sign of her ongoing humility. If you don't know that Samantha really, in many ways, came to prominence and visibility in our country as a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, looking at genocide, whether in Rwanda or in Yugoslavia, whether leading the Carr Institute for Human Rights, or being our fierce advocate at the United Nations, then you don't know the Samantha that I know. Some of the very best Americans were not born in America, but have come here from other parts of the world and see us with a sharper eye because they see at times the tension between our founding promises and our current lived reality. It is, in my view, in that way, that this remarkable journalist, diplomat, and public leader has the eye of an Irish woman and the heart of an American embodied in one person who is fierce and determined in her criticism of how the United States can and should be more and do more on the world stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please offer a thunderous round of applause to my friend, the Administrator of USAID.
Come on. You'll get that billion back. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Senator Coons. I know those of you in civil society know, and I suspect our African leaders gathered here on this stage and also gathered around this town know that we have no better friend in the U.S. Congress, in the United States, than Chris Coons for the agenda that we share, which is an agenda born of a recognition of common humanity, common security, but fundamentally about unleashing the potential of African young people to change their world, to change our world. And Chris Coons, every day, he's be leaving here at some point during our event to go try to hustle up resources. He's a diplomat in his own right, a development diplomat, as well as somebody who is passionately dedicated to using his platform to resolve conflict in Africa and beyond. And I just, again and again, feel grateful every day in this job that Chris Coons is our partner up on Capitol Hill. We're so lucky, Chris. Thank you. And we can give him a round of applause, actually, here as well. So I'm thrilled to be up here with the panel. Thank you all for bearing with us this morning. Obviously, there are a lot of leaders in town, and traffic and everything is complicated. We've decided to bring the equivalent of the UN General Assembly to Washington. For the New Yorkers among you, you know what that means. But to have representatives here from Cabo Verde, from Zambia, and from the Gambia, individuals who are trying to pursue justice and improve services for their citizens, individuals who recognize that when you have a political reform agenda, as these individuals do, and as the Gambian president as well does, there has to be a dividend. There has to be an economic dividend. There have to be opportunities for citizens. And even though you have reformers up here, and we will hear from them and talk to them, you also have some pretty steep and severe economic headwinds right now. So it's actually a hard time to be a reformer. It's very tempting in a lot of places to put the political reform and anti-corruption agenda, for example, to one side, to focus just on the bare facts of managing inflation, fuel prices, food prices. But what we have here gathered are people who are moving forward with reforms and who recognize, I think, and this is what we're here to talk about, the centrality of civil society in securing that economic dividend, that political dividend. So we have here in Cabo Verde, Prime Minister Correa y Silva. His government, just as one example, has worked with civil society to pass a gender parity law. This is in 2019. That has borne significant fruit already in terms of changing the complexion of the Cape Verde legislature. This is a law that required a minimum of 40% of candidates on candidate lists to be female. And now that has brought about a sea change, again, in who is in the legislature. And I think it's fair to say as well how that legislature is going to approach the passage of laws. In the Gambia, after 23 years of dictatorship and repression, the current president, President Barrow, was chosen by voters in a peaceful election. He has passed laws to protect the judiciary from executive interference. And we have here President Barrow's foreign minister, Mamadou Tangara. And I just want to say a word about Mamadou. Mamadou was my colleague when I was UN ambassador under President Obama and Vice President Biden. And when the previous dictator of 23 years was voted out of an election where brave people of Gambia stood up to have their voices heard and their votes counted, not altogether surprisingly, the previous president rejected the results of the election, a habit that is fairly widespread, and decided that he was going to try to cling to power. Now, the easy way when something like that happens and you have a dictator who's running your country, and if you're a diplomat in the Foreign Service and you're posted abroad as Mamadou was at the UN, the thing you generally do is you go along, you get instructions from capital, and those instructions, what are you going to do? Well, Mamadou didn't take that approach. He, along with some number of colleagues, but not an overwhelming number of colleagues around the world, decided to use their platforms and their voices and reject this power grab, this attempt in turn to reject the results of the election. And the consequences could have been very serious for him, for his family. But this act of resistance was one, I think, that also helped embolden African leaders who stood up on behalf of the people's vote and the people's choice. And that is how we have President Barrow in place today. So Mamadou just, we have John F. Kennedy wrote the great book, Profiles in Courage. If that book were written today, I hope they'd look at the Gambia's story and you and your diplomatic colleagues and the risks you took for democracy. Thank you. And last but not least, we have the man known as HH, President Hichilema from Zambia, who already, having been arrested more than a dozen times as an opposition leader, having had all the odds stacked against him, and the young people who came out en masse on behalf of his candidacy, already, just in the relatively short time he's been in office, has abolished public secondary school fees, reopened closed media outlets, prosecuted corrupt officials, and there are a lot to choose from, and pledged to repeal an existing law that criminalizes insulting the president. So I do want to say about all of the reforms that each of these individuals are a part of trying to shepherd, a lot of the kinds of reforms that are being put forward and implemented are reforms that were put forward in the first instance by civil society. Government and civil society can be effective partners just as often as civil society can be a constructive critic. Today, African civil society organizations are observing elections in Senegal, exposing government corruption in the Democratic Republic of Congo, fighting to restore civilian governance in Sudan. There are countless examples of how civil society and government can team up. Members of civil society are among our most powerful change agents. They can be tough critics. I'm a former civil society advocate, as Senator Coons indicated, who now finds myself in government, seeing the press releases from civil society criticizing things that we are trying to do, and it can be maddening. If only they understood all of the constraints. So, of course, we chafe under that criticism, even if we would not be here without the activism of civil society, not least in things like voter registration and protecting free and fair elections, even in this country. The truth is, we need civil society as government actors and as government champions of reform. We actually can't know how the policies that we implement or that you all legislate are being lived in the real world. We may have the best of intentions, we just actually don't know often exactly how those are being felt and where the slippage occurs, because things don't always work in the real world the way that they are intended. We often don't have the reach ourselves, notwithstanding our big media platforms. In this media environment, we don't have the reach even to get the message out about COVID vaccination or about, take-up of some of the reforms and initiatives that are being put out there. And if we are honest, we also get additional motivation. We have our reform motivation, we hope, but we get additional motivation from being held accountable. There's no question. In a democracy, when we are held accountable to the people and to civil society, there is no coasting. You cannot coast. You are always scrutinized and held to account. So we should strive to see critiques not as affronts, but as opportunities to strengthen and sharpen our responses to some of the world's most pressing issues. Incorporating these diverse voices and their perspectives into our policymaking processes can drive tangible change that is both inclusive and critically enduring, because that is what we are seeking, is not just change, but sustainable change, sustainable development, sustainable reform and opportunity. So thank you all. Can't wait to hear these leaders speak to what they are doing in their countries. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, Senator Coons, ambassadors, distinguished guests, and participants. First of all, thank you so much to my boss, Administrator Power, and Senator Coons for those powerful, powerful remarks, which really go to the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Mande Muyangwa. I am the Assistant Administrator for Africa at USAID. It is my honor and distinct pleasure to introduce the three leaders who, through their words and actions, demonstrate that inclusive processes and open, respectful dialogue with their citizens enable for better policymaking and citizen-responsive governance. First, I would like to introduce His Excellency, President Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia. As many of you know, President Hichilema contested 5 previous elections, enduring numerous arrests, isolation, and torture before assuming his country's highest office in 2021, riding a historic turnout powered by millions of first-time voters, young people, and women. As Administrator mentioned, President Hichilema has committed to undertaking a far-reaching agenda of democratic and economic reforms, expanding economic opportunities, creating jobs, delivering responsive and transparent governance, and addressing corruption and other challenges facing the country. President Hichilema, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, moderator. Just to acknowledge, sorry, oh, I take the floor, right. It's easy actually there. Thank you very much. My apologies. Just to acknowledge the presence of the President of the U.S. Institute of Peace, Senator Coombs, USAID leader, Madam Samantha Power, someone doing lots of work for us on the continent, and thank you very much for that. And my colleagues on the panel, but also your excellencies that are present here, and indeed the civil society for whom this forum is being organized. Thank you to USAID for organizing this. Very grateful for that. I think the issue is clear for us that, let me talk from the context of Zambia and see how we relate that to the African continent and I think to the global community. First and foremost, it's very important that we have civil society involvement in what we do in our countries. For us that are in public office, running public affairs, it is critical that we partner in some way or another with the civil society, the broader civil society with all its various components in it. Criticism is part of it, really, is not the issue. The issue is to work together for what? To improve the lives of citizens in our individual countries where we operate as civil society, where we operate as governments. That's the reason we occupy those roles, those functions, is to do something that overall help improve the quality of life for our people. For us, for me, and the government, our government, New Dawn government, we're very clear about that. So our intent is to do just that. And we were elected on the platform of change, change to better the people's lives. And we also understand that it's almost impossible to deliver change unless we do two sides of the equation, the same equation, and manage them rightly. One side is to ensure that we are able to deliver development, the economy. The economy is crucial. If you're talking about improving the welfare of the people, the economy can never be considered second fiddle, because that's what creates the ability to deliver better lives for our people, be it education for the young people, as we've done in Zambia, to basically make education available to all up to grade 12. Keep the girl child in school longer. And we know why we should do that. Obviously, it doesn't mean eliminating the boy child, but also to care, before I move away to that, to ensure that the kids go to college. And when they go to college, after college, quality education, they can get job opportunities. And for me, from the private sector, from my experience, my sins of the past, they ought to get business opportunities overall. And then the obvious things to take care of the weak, the poor, I hate that word, the poor, but those that are disadvantaged. Issues of gender, issues of the old people, the retired people. As some of you may know, in our country, people retired 20 years ago, never got their benefits. In 1 year in office, we've been able to pay the outstanding retirement benefits to all our people who deserved it. 1 or 2 may be coming through, that's normal. That's extremely important. We can continue the issues of nutrition, issues of, if you like, sanitation, water, issues of, all of those are importantly crucial, not just to those in government, but to those in the civil society as well. Otherwise, what is your agenda as civil society? I don't think there's anything else. The issues of human rights come in there, because really access to opportunity is a human right, isn't it? Access to opportunity is a human right. So I will return just a little bit on that because time is not with us. Now, the other side of the equation for us is a prerequisite, an essential ingredient to allow us to run the economy better. What is that? For us, from the Zambian context, and I think Africa as well, we've seen the issues around the absence of the rule of law in many of our countries. We experienced that ourselves. I used to argue just 18 months ago that I needed a passport to go to another region of my own country because I was not allowed. The freedom of movement, assembly, association. I think it's important, as it is for the civil society, but for those of us in public office and government, to ensure that we have the rule of law and rights, liberties, and freedoms are respected for all our people, without exception. I think that's our agenda. And you'll see, and I argue that that has an effect on the economic side of the agenda, of the equation. There's no question about it. The more freer people are, the more entrepreneurial are they likely to be, given other conditions, opportunity, and other things. And we are working in Zambia very hard to restore the rule of law. And that goes, I must say, Madam Samantha, to the dislike of some of our members, political party members, who thought that once we assume office, they will now do what those we replaced were doing. Unacceptable. And I've made it very clear to my own party colleagues that if you go and create trouble in the markets, you extort money from a widow who has 8 children, and she feeds her children from the market by extorting money from her, reducing her ability to trade freely, you find me standing in front of you. That's not easy to do to your own party members. It sounds easy. It's not easy. It's a very difficult proposition because populism tend to take the order or the space in the queue. So those are issues that the civil society must pay attention to governments like ours. That before we took office, no one from our party could wear patrigaria in a public place, at a bus stop, at a market, even in the office of a civil society organization. You couldn't, unless you want to commit suicide. It's not a joke. And like it's a flash of a second, before we were even sworn in, once we were declared winners, after days of pulling legs, refusal to give office, to hand over office, we made a pronouncement that the rule of law will apply, freedoms will apply, and that was the end, even before we got the instruments of power. Leadership is key in public office, in the civil service, in the civil society, to do the right things for the agenda we choose or we chose to represent to better the lives of the people overall. That's the issue here. And today, the colleagues that used to basically wage weapons of all kinds against our members, if you wore a red T-shirt, then it's trouble. They wear green T-shirts. They can wear green anywhere, anywhere, and no one will attack them. That's important. It's extremely important. Those freedoms are important. I also want to say that the issues of corruption are central to the civil society. But you should not be surprised that you have partners in a government like ours, that in the fight against corruption, which in our country and in a number of African countries damages the economy, takes away resources from people, for us, madam, increased our debt position to an unsustainable level. And from my training, the balance sheet is 2 sides. We borrow more money, there must be a compensating asset. In our country, we borrowed more money, the asset went down. the gap grew. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand there's a problem. And so therefore we're determined to fight corruption, and we like the civil society in our country, in our region, and indeed elsewhere, to work with us in this agenda. Because I must say, in our country, because of polarization over years, and I see that trend in other African countries, where a genuine fight against corruption is abused to mean political victimization. And the civil society must be very careful not to fall in that trap, because you are protecting the rights of the other politicians. No. Public resources belong to the public, private to the private, and we protect both. That's the issue. You will also be delighted to know that in our country, once we took office, we made it very clear to our own party that there will be a separation between the party in terms of assets, in terms of revenue, and the government. In the previous government, the two were clubbed together. And that's why we had such a runaway corruption situation. Again, it takes leadership to say that to your own members. There's a little bit of ugly scenes out there, but for me, it's an unquestionable situation that we must not even have debates around it. Again, we invite the civil society to acknowledge, if not to note, that major difference which helps to slow down corruption. I don't want to say too many more things. I think I've set the stage by saying there's a component tied to the rule of law, tied to human rights, tied to corruption fight, tied to many other things. It's governance, good governance. Good governance. It's extremely important that us who are running public offices understand that if we don't run our countries properly, prudently, fairly, and the institutions are not there to protect even the weak, we could have a problem, a very serious problem, which could lead to what we don't want. And that's the issues around, basically, peace, security, and stability, which is very important. I think I have said a lot of things here, but all I want to suggest to the group here is that we, as leaders on the continent now, are concerned about the threat on democracy, the increasing extremism on our continent, the increasing intolerance on our continent, coupled with economic difficulties arising from COVID-19, yes, but the difficulties were there before COVID-19. That's the truth. That's the truth. We saw it ourselves in Zambia. But also the issues around absence of economic opportunities, driving young talent, African talent across the Mediterranean. It's something we're concerned about. So it's important for us to protect democracy. It is important for us to do what is right all the time as leaders. If I give you an example of the COVID vaccinations in our country, when we took over, it was only 3%. In 1 year, we've taken to 80%. It's not that we have the money, it was leadership. That leadership is required to tame the extremism, temptations that are increasing. Only a few days ago, 27 lives were lost, died on our soil, something that is really detestable, and drove across boundaries, and they suffocated, and then they were just thrown away in one of our farms. These issues must raise us to ask questions in civil society. Why do people have to get into a container, a fuel tanker, to get to another country? What is motivating that? Two general issues: economy. Secondly, I think the issues of governance around our countries. It's a difficult thing for certain leaders like myself to say so. But really, instability anywhere has a potential to destabilize any other place on the globe. We've seen that in Ukraine and Russia war, which was increase the cost of food for us, increase the cost of fuel, cost of fertilizer, inhibiting our ability to manage the macro issues. For us, that was priority number one, to manage macro issues. Inflation, too high, 24%, we've dragged it down to 9.8 in 1 year. And several other variables, foreign exchange market stability. These are important aspects, but the context of what I'm saying, Madam Samantha, is the issue of ensuring that the aspect of peace, stability, human rights, governance, a group of all of those are combined with the economic opportunity. Then we have the ability to provide the rights that our people need, the young people, all of that stuff, where I started from. And we invite this civil society that, I like what you've said, just sometimes let's have conversations to understand our agendas. And most times when we checklist these two, we'll find that